People who have came close to dying, what were your last thoughts? Story 1. I once witnessed a pedestrian get hit by a car. He flew over the vehicle and hit his head on the asphalt. I never found out if he survived, but the first car to arrive was a police officer on his way to work. The ambulance and fire truck were on the scene in less than 5 minutes. Another guy and I stood in the road to stop traffic and prevent the injured man from getting run over. Some drivers honked at us, but I was too focused on talking to the guy who got hit, trying to keep him calm. Meanwhile, the other guy stopping traffic stood there flipping off the honking drivers. I felt bad for the man who was hit. I think he was suicidal. There were no other cars in the area, and if he had waited just 5 seconds, he would have made it across the street safely. I also felt bad for the driver. Just some poor college kid minding his own business. He wasn't on his phone or doing anything reckless. Story 2. A couple of years ago, my mom hit an elderly woman. She was driving home after work to pick up her dog from the sitter, doing 30 miles per hour in a 30 miles per hour residential zone. She wasn't on her phone, just driving and thinking about normal things. Then out of nowhere, she felt a massive thud against the front side of her car. She immediately stopped and found that an elderly woman had collided with her car, not in another vehicle, but with her body. The woman hit her head on the pavement and suffered a serious injury. My mom has been a nurse for many years, so even in her shock, she immediately provided first aid while a bystander called an ambulance. Unfortunately, the woman passed away in the hospital about a week later. We still don't know if she lost her balance while waiting to cross the street or if she had dementia and wandered into the road. My mom said her first reaction was that someone had run full force into the side of her car. There was a police investigation, and her car was immediately taken for examination. But thankfully, they determined she hadn't done anything wrong. The dent on the side of the car made it clear the woman had hit the vehicle, not the other way around. Since her car was taken as evidence, a police officer actually drove my mom to pick up her dog and then took her home. He was incredibly kind and even let her hold the dog on her lap during the ride. Of course, the elderly woman was the main victim, and we all felt deeply for her family. But the accident also traumatized my mom. Imagine just driving home like any other day, and out of nowhere, being involved in something so tragic. For the first week, she kept getting flashbacks. She eventually processed it, but it was an absolutely horrific experience. I feel for everyone involved in accidents like that. Story 3. I have a serious health condition that makes taking medications a complete no-go for me. I overdosed on a normal dose of albuterol. I overdosed on a normal dose of promethazine, and there have been some other messed up incidents I don't even want to talk about. But anyway, when I overdosed on promethazine, my fever skyrocketed to 105 to 106 degrees Fahrenheit and wouldn't come down. I kept drifting in and out of consciousness, and my wife said I was talking in my sleep a lot. I was completely convinced, 100% without a shred of doubt, that I was in the middle of a war between humans and elves. I was saying things like, we have to split the house with them to prevent another war, and having full-on discussions about it. Meanwhile, my breathing was messed up, my fever wouldn't break, I couldn't get up, and I couldn't actually sleep. It was a nightmare. My final thoughts before blacking out were basically, hopefully the elves are okay with sharing the kitchen, because we still need to eat. A seriously messed up experience. Story 4. I was in a pretty bad car crash in my mid-teens. One afternoon on the way home from school, we got T-boned by a big Ford van. I could have sworn our light was green, but witnesses said my friend ran a red. I remember looking over, seeing the van coming, and just thinking, well, this is happening. I accepted it immediately. I was sitting in the front passenger seat, gripping the little handle above the door. The window shattered, and I ended up with hundreds of tiny cuts on my arm, neck, and face. It looked like something had been chewing on me. I also had some glass embedded in my hand. The passenger side door crushed in far enough to slam into me, leaving a fabric imprint down my side. It completely knocked the wind out of me and cracked 2 ribs. Once I caught my breath, I crawled out through the driver's side, my hand bleeding everywhere. But I was so pumped full of adrenaline that I barely felt anything. The next day, though, I could hardly move. Almost my entire right side was bruised and it hurt to breathe deeply. My friend's mom later showed me pictures of the car. Looking at the wreckage, I couldn't believe I had gotten off as easily as I did. Story 5. A little over 10 years ago, I had what they call a widowmaker heart attack. I spent the first day in the hospital with a balloon pump assisting my heart, keeping me alive until they could perform surgery the next day. They told my wife that my chances of survival were only about 20%. The priest came in. My family gathered, pretty much the whole 9 yards. The next morning, as they wheeled me into the operating room, I was joking around with the surgical nurse, quoting Monty Python, and get the machine that goes ping in case the administrator comes by. She was also a Monty Python fan, so we had a little back and forth. The look on the surgeon's face was priceless. I was still chuckling as I went under, my last thought being, "Faye, we got this." Afterward, the surgeon told me that in his entire career, I was the only patient who had ever entered his operating room laughing. He also said my attitude might have played a big role in my survival. Story 6. I was stuck in gridlock traffic with a wildfire raging on both sides of my vehicle. The heat was so intense, I couldn't even touch the window. Our cell tower was knocked out, so I couldn't call my family or friends to tell them I loved them. I just sat there, oddly at peace. There was nothing I could do. My whole family was sweating. My little brother was crying. I was 15, and I just sat there accepting that my life was what it was. I didn't bother thinking about what I wished I had done differently or what I still wanted to accomplish because, in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. I was convinced I would die quietly in a car with my family. My mind just shut down. I put my headphones in and played my favorite songs, thinking maybe I could die listening to one of them. When traffic finally started moving again after a few hours, I was so exhausted I could barely stay awake. The first time I showered after the fire, soot ran down the drain, and I just cried. Since then, I've started telling people I love them. I decided to live for myself. I came out. I started working toward a future. And this year, I even sat at my first bonfire. It was horrible. Story 7. When I was 16, my lower right wisdom tooth came in and broke the tooth next to it. That caused an abscess, which led to a bone infection in my jaw. My mom took me to the ER because she thought I had lockjaw. I couldn't open my mouth at all. The swelling was that bad. The doctor told her I couldn't be treated there, so they put me in an ambulance and rushed me to another hospital an hour away. I remember slipping in and out of consciousness while they prepped me for surgery. My dad was there. The last thing I remember thinking was that I didn't want to go yet, that if I died, so many people would be devastated. I was crying before the surgery, and my dad just calmed me down, telling me he loved me. I spent a month recovering in the hospital. My then boyfriend, now husband, visited me. I missed my high school finals that year, but I was discharged on Christmas Eve. Story 8. In retrospect, I was never actually close to dying, but I didn't know that at the time. I was flying an airplane, alone over a big lake. The engine started acting up. I radioed it in. A few seconds later, there was sputtering, and then silence. Prop airplanes are loud. The silence was deafening. I clearly said over my comms, "Houston flight, this is November 4, Niner 51 Alpha. I've lost my engine." Houston came back. 51 Alpha, say again. So I did. 51 Alpha, repeating, "I've lost my engine." There was a brief, but only very brief, moment of panic. After that, I did everything I had been trained to do, and eventually got the plane safely on the ground. So like I said, I was never actually going to die. I guess. But there was that moment when I was sure I'd end up at the bottom of that lake. Honestly, though, my only thought was, how in the world do I fix this? Story 9. Funny, for lack of a better word, story. When I was 10, my family went to Florida on vacation with some extended family. The plan was for my parents to head back home to Massachusetts a few days before my brother and me so we could stay longer with my aunt and cousins. It was my first time traveling without my parents, just my older brother, and only my second time ever being on a plane. On the flight back, as we were approaching Logan Airport, our plane suddenly started to drop out of the sky. Quite literally. Apparently, it only lasted for about 3 to 5 seconds, but the sudden pressure shift made the oxygen mask fall from the ceiling. I had seen enough movies at that point to know that meant we were about to die. I was definitely crying, freaking out like everyone else on board. It was, without a doubt, the most terrifying experience of my life. But for some reason, one thought stood out in my head. I'm never going to get to finish my Age of Empires 2 campaign, so apparently a video game was going to be my last thought. Story 10. I had the worst strain of mono currently known: strep throat, a double ear infection, an upper respiratory flu, a lower respiratory flu, a sinus infection, and pink eye. All at the same time. When I first got to the ER, they thought I might have a brain tumor. My vision was fading. I could barely hear, and the only thing I could think about was how I was about to ruin my parents, siblings, friends, and girlfriends' lives by dying so young and so suddenly. I didn't want to put them through that kind of pain. I thought I wouldn't even get the chance to say goodbye. I was so severely dehydrated that my organs were beginning to shut down. The doctors told me that if I had waited another day to go to the hospital, I would have died from total organ failure. My body was producing so many white blood cells that some of the nurses and doctors said it was the highest count they had ever seen in their professional careers. They administered 3 separate bags of fluids to keep me alive. They also gave me a huge dose of prednisone, over 200 milligrams. I was completely out of it for a week. I barely remember anything from that time, but somehow I made it home with my parents. I lived on smoothies and slept constantly. I even played Apex Legends and won matches, but I don't remember doing it. They forced me to drink 2 to 3 liters of water a day. I coughed up a lot of phlegm. After a week, the prednisone wiped out my flu symptoms and helped my body fight off the mono. But steroids can make bacterial infections worse, so the strep, ear infections, and pink eye were even more painful. I lost my voice for 2 weeks. Once I was off the steroids, they put me on an extremely strong antibiotic, which wiped out all the good bacteria in my system. I had to stay home for another 3 to 4 days to recover. 3 weeks after my ER visit, I went back to college. 5 weeks later, I finished the semester with a 3.4 GPA. Pretty damn proud of myself. Story 11. It was the end-of-year trip in 6th grade, and we were at a ropes course park where you could rock climb and walk across tall catwalks. I was attached to a relay with a team of my classmates 30 feet below me. I climbed up the pole, but when I got to the top, I chickened out. I signaled my teacher, and she gave me the go-ahead to lean back so I could be rappelled down. This is why you look before you leap, folks, because those kids were not paying attention. The moment I let go, I dropped straight off that catwalk like I had never even been there. As I fell through the air, watching the ground rush toward me, I saw something absolutely beautiful, breathtaking even. Light streamed through the trees in front of me, like the kind of golden sunlight you see flickering through the leaves of a tree when you're lying beneath it on a hot summer day. I was so taken by the sight that my last thought would have been, Christ, is that ever Bo? Then my classmates finally yanked on the rappel rope, and I stopped falling. My mom had passed away about 6 months before that, and for a long time, I was convinced it was her, or a guardian angel, or something. Spooky stuff. Bye. Story 12. I remember each handful of pills going down so easily, like swallowing a mouthful of food. It surprised me, considering I normally struggled to take more than a single pill at a time. But this time there was no struggle. I had downed 6 handfuls of a mixed cocktail of medications. At first, nothing happened. Everything was just quiet, almost unnervingly so. My mind started fogging up. My stomach churned suddenly, violently. My arms and legs felt unbearably heavy, shaky. When I tried to get up, I felt my heart beat. It had changed pace, hammering in my chest, echoing like thunder in my ears. The first words I managed to mumble, after fumbling to call my best friend, were, I messed up. Today marks 4 years since I walked out of the psychiatric ward after my attempt. I'm still here, and it feels good. Story 13. When I was about 11, I was home alone one summer day, just watching TV and eating Skittles. I like to put a bunch in my mouth at once and form a little Skittle ball to chew on. Something on the show I was watching made me laugh, and I accidentally swallowed the whole thing. It got lodged in my throat. For a few terrifying seconds, I realized I was completely alone. Nobody was there to help me, and I was probably going to die. Thankfully, I remembered seeing something in a cartoon or movie where a character jammed their stomach against a chair to dislodge something from their throat. So, with no other options, I lunged at the corner of the recliner as hard as I could. It actually worked. The Skittle ball popped out. I was unbelievably lucky because I had no idea what I was doing, but it was one of the scariest feelings I've ever experienced. I never ate Skittles that way again, and to this day, I'm still a little paranoid about eating certain things when I'm alone. Story 14. At 6 and 9 years old, my sister and I didn't realize that the section of the beach we went to had designated areas for swimmers, surfers, and no-swim zones. We were collecting shells when we noticed bigger ones further under the surf. We kept going deeper and deeper until we were suddenly swept away by a riptide. My sister was floating fine, but I struggled too much and got exhausted quickly. Desperate, I tried to cling to my big sister, but she kept pushing me off. My head stopped bobbing above the water, and I started to drown. My panicked last thought was, I'm going to drown, and my sister is going to let me die. A lifeguard spotted us and pulled us out. I was okay, aside from having some salt water in my lungs. I know now that my sister was only trying to stay afloat, but at the time, it felt like she was trying to kill me. Story 15. Late to the thread, blah, blah, blah. Former hero, addict, and dealer here. I dealt for about half of the decade I used. Being a small blonde girl in New Mexico, I relied on my guy friends to drive me around and help make sales in exchange for keeping them from getting dope sick. One of these guys in particular didn't care about much beyond getting his daily fix. Round that time, I had also been prescribed Klonopin. I barely remember a week of mixing the two. Seriously, don't do it before things took a bad turn. My routine was always the same: shoot up, pop a Klonopin, and then wake up in my own back seat for updates on sales. It's wild how safe you can feel around the worst kinds of people when you're high as a kite. At some point, this guy caught on to my pattern and told another girl he was interested in. I vaguely remember her getting into the front passenger seat while my friend drove, and I lay sprawled in the back like an idiot, way too confident in my own recklessness. She introduced herself politely because I had just made a big sale, and my friend had taken his cut and planned to share it with her. I remember thinking, I'll join you, and cooked up another shot, even though I had snorted some benzos just 10 minutes prior. The last thing I remember is my friend and his girl laughing and offering me chocolate. I thought, hell yeah, I love Hershey's with almonds. That was my last conscious thought. They ended up ditching me in the back of my car when I became unresponsive. By some miracle, I happened to be in an area where a real friend spotted my car, found me, and saved my life. I was basically dead, half naked, covered in chocolate, sprawled out in the backseat of my own car. To this day, I can only hope the half-naked part was just me being too high in skimpy clothes and rolling around, rather than something worse. Story 16. The closest I came to death was earlier this year. I had abnormal uterine bleeding that was so severe I couldn't stay conscious. I fainted 4 times in less than 12 hours and even vomited twice while unconscious. Thankfully, I was sitting up when I came to, so I didn't choke. At one point, I felt like I was dreaming, but it wasn't the life flashing before your eyes kind of dream. Just a mundane, ordinary moment. I must have been so unconscious that I slipped into REM sleep. As the day went on, I got so weak that I couldn't even lift myself off the bathroom floor. Every time I tried to sit up, I felt like I would pass out again. An ambulance was called and I was taken out on a stretcher. I barely had any awareness of what was happening. I had a strong urge to sleep, but something deep inside me knew I shouldn't. My best friend who was with me kept nudging me to keep me awake until the paramedics arrived. I was too out of it to feel fear, just an overwhelming exhaustion, like I needed to close my eyes. But I also had this sinking feeling that if I did, something bad would happen. When I got to the ER, they told me my hemoglobin count was at 4.6 and dropping fast. A nurse straight up told me that if I hadn't come in, I would have most likely died. I needed multiple blood transfusions just to be stabilized. Uterine fibroids are no joke. Story 17. It ended up being a false alarm, but I was at a movie theater about 30 minutes into Magic Mike with my mom and godmother. We were in the first theater to the right of the movie house when suddenly a young woman burst in, shouting, "They're shooting! They're shooting!" Everyone in my group immediately hit the floor. We were seated closest to the aisle, meaning that if a shooter came in and walked up, we'd be right in their path. In that moment, all I could think about was what would be best for my family, mainly my younger brother, who had just started middle school. I subtly positioned myself over my mom, making sure it wasn't obvious to her, but ensuring that if someone entered, I'd be able to cover her. It was terrifying, but I distracted myself by thinking logically about how to protect my loved ones. Even after everyone got up and moved toward the exit or hid behind the projection screen, I wasn't scared anymore. My focus remained the same. If things went south, my only goal was to protect my mother. Story 18. I'm so fat. Why are these people trying to force me to eat? I don't need food to live. Food is obsolete. All it does is make me fatter. By that point, I had struggled with bulimic anorexia for 5 years. I was so underweight that I could barely walk, fainted regularly, and had severe cognitive impairment. Later, I found a Christmas card I had made, and the letters weren't even written the right way. I was in the hospital, spending most of my time sitting in the warm shower because I was always freezing. They told me I had only a couple of months to live, but I refused to eat. Now, 4 years later, I'm doing much better. It took a specialized hospital and 3 months of expensive care to save my life. While an eating disorder never truly disappears from the mind, I've come a long way. It's terrifying how much my perception of my own body had been distorted. I was a skeleton, but all I saw was fat. Story 19. I was in an Afghan village. My MOS was electrical engineering, and we traveled from village to village building small schools and clinics to win hearts and minds. One day we came under fire from enemies about 400 to 500 yards away. Both sides started shooting. In the middle of the crossfire, about 50 yards from our lines, I noticed two children who had been playing. They were now lying behind a small rock, screaming. I don't know why, but without thinking, I dropped my rifle, ran out to them, picked up the little boy, and took the girl's hand. I started running back to safety with them. About 10 yards away from a small wall, our safe zone, I suddenly felt like an elephant had drop-kicked me in the back. All the air was forced out of my lungs, and I was thrown forward onto the ground. I'd been shot. My last thoughts were, at least I died saving kids. Not a bad way to go. I thought of Milo, our family Labrador, and how much I missed him. I realized how temporary life is, just a blink compared to whatever comes after. Then I felt the girl tugging on my hand, pulling me back into reality. Bullets were still flying past. That's when I realized I wasn't dead. The bullet had hit my plate. I was okay. Well, except for the fractured ribs. The pain suddenly hit me, dulled only by the adrenaline. But I got back on my feet and made it to safety with the girl. Because of the broken ribs, I got to sit out the rest of the deployment. Story 20. I'm a physician. About 20 months ago, I woke up from a Sunday afternoon nap with searing pain in my abdomen. My legs gave out beneath me. I remember only a few moments, paramedics arriving, a doctor inserting a venous line, and then absolutely nothing for 6 days. When I briefly regained consciousness, I couldn't move or speak. I remember wondering if I was in hell. People were walking on the walls and ceiling, harassing me. Then I dropped out completely. No last thoughts, no visions. I simply ceased to exist. At that point, the doctors told my wife I wasn't going to survive. A few days later, I woke up again. I recognized my wife and son. Looking down at my arms, back and legs, I saw post-mortem lividity, the discoloration of the skin caused by blood pooling after death. As a pathologist, I'd only ever seen it on bodies during autopsies. I realized just how close I had come to dying. I had suffered an acute gallbladder infection, leading to antibiotic-resistant septicemia, septic shock, and multi-organ failure. They removed my gallbladder, and I spent 17 days in the ICU before finally stabilizing. Story 21. Not sure if this qualifies as a near-death experience, but it was definitely an oh crap, we're about to die moment. In high school, I was driving around with two friends. I can't remember if the driver only had a school permit, which we used to drive everywhere, or if we had just turned 16. Either way, we were on a gravel road, and my friend, the driver, had ADD. Because of that, I was always designated as the front passenger whenever I was in the car. My job was to grab the steering wheel and make sure we didn't drive off the road or crash into anything whenever he got distracted and forgot to steer. Looking back as an adult, that's terrifying. But this time I happened to be in the back seat. He was distracted, driving way too fast, and didn't notice a turn in the road. When he finally saw it, he slammed the brakes and jerked the wheel, sending us sliding out of control. And all I could think was, he overcorrected. Story 22. I know it's probably unnecessary considering the context of this thread, but just in case, trigger warning for choking. Like someone else mentioned, I once got food stuck in my throat and genuinely thought I was going to die. I had made one of those cheap dollar pizzas, the spongy ones, and had cut it into 4 pieces. The first piece I put in my mouth wasn't chewed properly because I was distracted playing BioShock. I swallowed the whole piece in one go and instantly regretted it. Within seconds, I was completely choking. My vision started closing in, no air was getting past the pizza, and my limbs became weak. Any strength I had left was vanishing at a terrifying speed. I was alone in the back room of the house, no phone within reach, and this was before every teenager had a cell phone, or maybe I was just too broke to have one. At that point, my body took over. I started gulping uncontrollably, trying to clear my esophagus, but it only made things worse. I remember tears streaming down my face as I realized I'm about to die from a damn dollar store pizza. The worst part? I had just survived a suicide attempt a few months earlier. I was writing a new lease on life, trying to move forward, and now this was how it was going to end. I had this overwhelming wave of dread, thinking about how my friends would be the ones to find me, lifeless, decomposing in their house. I thought about how much it would traumatize them. Then out of sheer desperation, I started slamming my rib cage against the backrest of the chair I had been sitting in. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. The 5th time, I aimed for the pointed corner of the chair. It had these sharp spires, almost like a castle's turrets. It worked. The angle shifted the pizza just enough to trigger a violent vomiting response. I felt the piece dislodge, then I vomited everywhere. And after that, I just lay on the floor, crying for almost an hour. It was awful. I never told anyone. I spent the next 4 hours cleaning the room to make sure there was no trace of what had happened. I haven't thought about it in years, but it definitely changed me. To this day, I chew my food thoroughly and eat much slower than I used to. Story 23. When I was a junior in high school, I was dating a girl who struggled with severe depression. Every day brought a new problem, and I was always the one who had to solve it, never her. At the same time, I was terrible at school. I had transitioned from being the quiet, socially anxious kid to the one who only cared about partying. My grades were in freefall. On top of that, my brother was a recovering drug addict and a thief, and my mother worked full-time, leaving me to deal with everything on my own. Point is, my life was pure stress. One day, everything hit me at once. And ironically, the straw that broke the camel's back was something as simple as my mom accidentally locking me out of the house in the middle of a brutal Minnesota winter. All of that stress erupted into pure rage. It felt like my anger was melting the snow as it fell around me. I could feel my blood boiling. I screamed, punched, and kicked at nothing. My vision blurred. Then I passed out. When I woke up, I was lying in a snowbank in my driveway, still incredibly lightheaded, but strangely warm. It was that kind of perfect, cozy warmth, like waking up in the most comfortable bed, with blankets wrapped just right. That's when it hit me. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I'm lying in a snowbank. This is bad. I forced myself to focus. The only thought in my head was get to a neighbor's house. It felt like I was dragging a ton of bricks with every step. First house, no answer. Second house, still nothing. I barely made it to the third before collapsing on their doorstep. No answer. Even then, I didn't panic. My body was shutting down, but my mind kept saying, keep moving, keep moving. I managed to scrape my way over to one last neighbor's door, barely knocking, more like clawing at it. They opened the door and I fell forward into their house. It was an old family friend. They immediately pulled me inside, wrapped me in blankets, and placed an electric heater on my chest. That's when I finally let go. I woke up later, still on their couch with my mom nudging me awake. I was weak, nauseous, and completely disoriented. She took me home, and we brushed it off. I wasn't dying, right? Over the next few days, though, things got worse. I felt weaker and weaker, to the point where I could barely keep my eyes open at school. My mom, who isn't anti-vax but is very anti-doctor, insisted I just needed rest. And living in the US, going into debt over a hospital bill wasn't exactly appealing. But soon I was too sick to get out of bed. My mind felt numb, I was dizzy, and I developed a deep, hacking cough. I finally convinced my mom to take me to a minute clinic. The doctor took one quick look at me, checked my throat, and said, "You just have strep. You'll be fine. Sleep it off." They gave me some kind of throat spray, and that was it. Back to bed I went. What followed was the worst sickness of my life. My cough worsened. My body felt like it was shutting down. I lost weight. Even simple thoughts exhausted me. One morning, I mumbled to my mom that I needed to go to the doctor again. I had no energy to argue. My body was wrecked. This time we went to an actual clinic. The doctor barely glanced at me before saying, "You need to go to the emergency room. Right now." That's when I knew I was dying. Everything blurred. My mom hurried me in the right direction while my mind drifted. I was running on fumes. At the ER, my doctor looked like he had just walked off a soap opera set. Tight scrubs, gold chain. He examined me, then turned to my mom and said, Your son has a peritonsiller abscess that's closing his throat. He has about the tip of a pen's worth of space to breathe. The infection is shutting down his immune system. I had three choices. Emergency tonsillectomy. Try to sleep it off, not really an option. Let him drain the abscess with a needle right now. He said the third option was quick and easy. I warned him that I was terrified of needles and had a terrible gag reflex. He brushed me off, numbed my throat, and when I told him I could still feel something, he got annoyed and insisted I was wrong. My mom, sensing disaster, told him to put on a face mask. The doctor scoffed. "Who's the doctor here?" We shut up. He punctured the abscess, and I gagged so hard he accidentally stabbed the back of my throat. Blood and pus exploded all over his face. At that point, everything blurred. My throat flooded with blood and pus, and I was too weak to roll over. My body started vomiting violently, but I was too drained to even react. Then I felt my mother roll me onto my side. I vomited all over the floor. That was when I felt the most at peace. It was like I had already died. I could almost see myself from above, watching everything unfold. And in that moment, I made a promise. If I survived, I would appreciate everything. I wouldn't waste my life being angry. Then blackness. When I woke up, I was drugged out of my mind, an IV in my arm, lying in a hospital bed. But I made it. And honestly, it changed me. Writing this still makes me emotional because I woke up a completely different person. As horrible as it was, I'm actually grateful. It made me realize what truly matters. Story 24. I miss my friends and family so much. I'd do anything just to argue with my mom one more time, or listen to my best friend complain about his girlfriend, or even clean up the torn paper towels my dog always scattered across the living room. If I could just get one more chance, I swear, I'll never touch Hero or Coca again. April 8th, 2018, around 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I was on a gurney being wheeled into the operating room for emergency surgery. A fecal impaction had perforated my sigmoid colon, tearing its lining in half. I woke up 2 days later in the ICU, intubated with a colostomy bag. Someone placed a phone against my ear, and I heard my mother's voice, and I cried. I've been completely sober for 21 months now. I'm in my final semester of undergrad and heading to PA school, so I can help others the way they helped me. Story 25. I hope my kids will be okay without me. I was literally 5 to 10 seconds away from drowning in whitewater. Unbeknownst to me, my vest was not rated for whitewater, and I was pushed to the bottom of the river, dragged along by the insane current. When I knew I was done, that was my last complete thought. Everything else was brief flashes of surprisingly calm emotions. I basically stopped fighting and let it happen. That's what ultimately saved my life. Not fighting allowed me a bit longer with the limited oxygen left in my blood. The river continued to drag me along the bottom. Then suddenly the current shifted and shot me back up approximately 20 feet to the surface. I struggled to swim to shore while coughing up water. Once I knew the most immediate danger was a few feet behind me, I lay in the water, trying to catch my breath. It's funny to me now. I used to think shipwreck scenes in films were exaggerated. Surely someone who nearly drowned would drag themselves completely out of the water just to be safe, but it's exactly like what you see in films. Once the immediate threat is gone, you just lie in the shallow water, trying to feel human again. I've had other near-death experiences, but I didn't know how close I was to dying in those moments. This time, I knew. I was absolutely certain it was all over. As a result, the next 6 months were the best of my life. My depression practically disappeared. My anxiety lost all power over me. I knew how bad things could get and how much better they could be. Sadly, that doesn't last forever. Mental illness always finds its way back. Story 26. Why the hell aren't you getting help? Press the panic button. A nurse was supposed to inject antibiotics into my IV, but ended up injecting something else. I was mid-conversation with her when I suddenly couldn't speak or breathe. My eyelids closed slowly despite trying to keep them open, and then I couldn't hold my head up. I was fully conscious. She just sat there repeating my name, shaking me slightly, trying to get me to respond. Eventually, she ran down the hallway yelling for help. Some staff rushed in and got me breathing again. I asked her why she didn't press the panic button. She said, "I didn't want everyone to come running." I did, I sure as hell did. They refused to tell me what was actually injected and instead tried to convince me I had a panic attack because I was nervous about the injection. It was my third day in the hospital after breaking my femur in a skydiving accident. I had already received several of these injections since my surgery. I knew it wasn't a panic attack. Story 27. Not my story, rather my son's. 6 years ago, when he was 5, he went to a kindergarten graduation swim party. I had to work overtime, and my wife stayed home with our infant daughter. Our son was with trusted parents, friends from his school. Then we got the call. Our son had drowned. They pulled him out of the pool, not breathing, no pulse. The parents hosting the party called 911, and an ambulance was on the way. Luckily, one of the mothers had just renewed her pediatric CPR certification the day before and started CPR. She managed to resuscitate my son just before the medics arrived. After a few hours in the hospital and numerous tests, we were cleared to go home and relax. When asked what happened, my son simply said, "I jumped in the pool, Daddy. I didn't have my floaties on, and I didn't know it was the deep end. I couldn't get to the surface, so I got tired and fell asleep." The mom who hosted the party later came to the hospital, apologized profusely, and gave my son a gift bag full of toys and coloring books. She also handed me a separate bag containing a bottle of Jack Daniels. That bottle didn't last long after we got home. 6 years later, my son is still healthy and still a smartass. He loves swimming. The little guy even asked to go swimming the very next weekend after the accident. He did, much to his mother's dismay. But what's the saying? When you fall off the horse, get back on. Now I'm off to wake up my 11-year-old, give him a hug, then go have a smoke and a drink. Story 28. I used to do a lot of drugs when I was a teen. Mostly pills, whatever I could find. Uppers, downers, anything. I went on that way for almost a year doing drugs daily. Then one day, I woke up feeling nauseous and told my mom I wasn't going to school because I thought I had a stomach bug. I spent the entire day crawling back and forth to the bathroom to vomit. I was so dehydrated I couldn't walk without passing out. When my mom came home from work, I was barely responsive. She and my stepdad carried me to the car and rushed me to the ER. My entire family showed up. Sitting in the waiting room, I remember feeling an eerie sense of peace. I was depressed at the time, so death didn't scare me. I don't know if it was a hallucination, but I swear I could feel my soul slowly leaving my body, starting from my fingertips. My brain just accepted it. Yep, that's your soul leaving. You're going to die soon. Somehow I survived. The doctors told me I was so dehydrated my organs were starting to fail. I spent 2 weeks in the ICU and miraculously recovered. They were baffled, said there was no way I should have recovered so quickly. Now I stay ridiculously hydrated. Funny how time changes your perspective. Back then, death didn't scare me. Now I think about everything I'd leave behind. Story 29. I was almost killed by a man I was in a relationship with when I was in my early 20s. He was watching his kids from a previous relationship, maybe 4 and 6 years old, while his ex was at a conference. I called to check in, but he wasn't answering. Worried, I went over to the house. He was completely drunk. I put the kids to bed and confronted him about how irresponsible it was to get so wasted while being the only adult around. What if there had been an emergency? We got into a huge fight. It ended with him strangling me on the kitchen floor. Right before I lost consciousness, I had a very distinct thought. Wow, this is how it ends. I wonder if he'll have the presence of mind to get rid of my body before the kids wake up. I wonder if they'll ever find me. I woke up sometime later. He hadn't held on long enough to finish the job. I barricaded myself in the hallway to the kids' room because I couldn't leave them alone with him. When he woke up in the morning, he looked at me confused and asked why his arms were scratched up. He had no memory of what happened. Story 30. I was T-boned by an SUV while riding my motorcycle with my girlfriend on the back. The driver was a 20-year-old in his mom's car. I was 21. I remember turning my head left, seeing it about to hit me and just accepting it. No screaming, no panic, just a weirdly calm reaction. I even pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the scene seconds after I stopped rolling. I texted my mom, letting her know I was in an accident, but okay. My mom somehow arrived before the firefighters. She said the Lord guided her there. Adrenaline was so strong I didn't need pain meds on the ambulance ride. They assumed I wasn't seriously injured. Turned out my foot peg went through my ankle. It tore a huge gash across my foot and stopped right at my Achilles tendon, somehow not severing it. I got another bike 2 years later. Now I wear over $2,000 worth of gear, including $300 race boots that probably would have saved me from this lifelong injury. Winter sucks though. Screws in my ankle make it more painful. Story 31. I overdosed on roughly 50,000 milligrams of acetaminophen. It was a suicide attempt. I don't know why I'm still alive, but I do remember throwing up everything I had, then all the bile, and then dry heaving nonstop. I was ridiculously thirsty, but water only made me vomit more. I lost my hearing and vision for several days. All I could think during it all was, I really hope I don't die. The regret right after a suicide attempt is very real. I realized it wasn't that I wanted to die, I just didn't want to be here in that moment. If you're struggling with these kinds of thoughts or are in crisis, please reach out for help. There are resources available, and therapy can make a difference. My inbox is always open. If you need someone to talk to or help finding resources, I'm here. It's never too late, and things do get better. I've lived so much life that I never would have experienced had I not made it through. Story 32. I was lucky enough to have my wife and kids with me after a botched surgery. I had internal bleeding throughout my chest and abdomen, and the pain was beyond words. But they sent me home, thinking I was in the clear. I collapsed at home from the pain, and my wife called an ambulance. As we sat together by the front door, all I could think about was trying to comfort my wife and kids. I just held them and said things between short breaths like, "It's okay, buddy. I'm going to be fine. While I'm in the hospital, you're the man of the house. I'm very proud of you," and other reassurances. Even when the emergency surgery team was preparing me and telling me that it might be my last chance to say goodbye, I didn't say it. I just kept reassuring them. Maybe that helped reassure me too. Maybe it made my body fight harder. They opened me up and had to remove quite a lot to get to the damage, but the surgery was successful. Now I have a long scar from my chest to my groin. They even curved around my belly button, so I got to keep that. Story 33. I broke my leg in a place where nobody could find me. I was stuck there for 5 days, unable to move. On top of that, I had a nasty shoulder wound that started to get infected. Luckily, I had a jug of water in my bag, so I didn't die of thirst, but near the end, I was running out. It's important to note that I was already very hungry when this started. What was going through my mind? By the second day, I had somewhat accepted my fate. I wasn't actively wanting to die, but it felt inevitable. My thought process shifted from, I hope I survive, to if I'm going to die, I hope it's not from starvation or infection. By the third day, my mind became fixated entirely on food. It was like a form of psychosis. No matter how much I tried to think about something else, my brain would immediately snap back to food. The fourth day was pure torment. The physical pain was unbearable, but the mental anguish was even worse. Ironically, the suicidal thoughts I had before all of this were gone. They were replaced by a single thought. I don't want to die. Not before I eat something. Just one more meal, then I can die. Eventually, I was discovered by a woman who lived nearby. She gave me food and got her son to help me. They got me to a medical camp, where I was put on an IV and started my recovery. Story 34. I accidentally interrupted a guy trying to break into my truck in my driveway. I was about 4 feet away from him when he started running. I took about 3 steps toward him and yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" in a loud, threatening tone. My fight or flight kicked in, and I instinctively chose fight. But something told me to let him go, so I stopped my pursuit. At this point, he was about 8 feet away when he suddenly turned around. I was wearing only pajama pants. It was dark, and I saw him pointing at me. Time seemed to freeze. Then I saw a flash. I felt a rush of air between my right arm and rib cage and heard a thud behind me. Then another shot rang out from someone about 5 feet to his left. This time I heard a sharp snap. My only thought was that it's hard to hit a moving target. So I dove to my left as 2 more shots were fired, hitting the fence behind me. The only thing on my mind now was getting behind my engine block. I sprinted behind my wife's car as they sped away, still shooting at me. I ran inside, stripped down completely, and had my trauma nurse wife check me for bullet wounds while she was on the phone with the police. Somehow, I wasn't hit. Story 35. It was 3 years ago this month. I was on my way to work around 5 a.m. when I stopped for my usual extra-large hot coffee at Tim Hortons. Everything seemed normal. The stretch of road I was on had a posted speed limit of 55 miles per hour, but I usually traveled at 60 to 65. No traffic. About 3 miles down the road, I reached to adjust the volume on my radio. When I looked up, a 6-point white-tailed deer was standing in the middle of the road, about 20 yards in front of me. At that speed and distance, all I could do was slam the brakes. My only thought was, great, I'm going to need a new car. But I didn't just hit the deer. That thing went under the car and buckled my front wheels. Suddenly, I had no steering, no brakes, just a 60-mile-per-hour slide straight toward a 6-foot deep culvert. I started bracing myself. Oh, hell, I don't want broken bones. Then it hit me. I was a reckless 22-year-old who never wore a seatbelt. My first real thought of panic, I might actually die. Instantly, I felt gut-wrenching guilt. The thought of my family having to bury me just because I was too stupid to wear a seatbelt made me sick. But strangely, I was calm. I forced myself into the seat as hard as I could, gripping the wheel with everything I had. I barely had time to register my headlights shining into the treetops before I slammed into the culvert and went airborne. I closed my eyes and braced for impact. What followed was the most violent series of movements I have ever experienced. My head hit the roof multiple times. My shoulder scraped the ground through the shattered driver's side window, but I never let go of the wheel. The entire crash happened in less than 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When everything stopped, I was upside down, still gripping the seat. I opened my eyes and let go. I collapsed onto the roof of the car, muttering, "Oh, hell," over and over. I crawled out through the broken window and sat against the wreckage, completely in shock. Not from the accident, but from the fact that I felt fine. I checked myself. Nothing. No bruises, no lacerations, no broken bones. Just a few tiny cuts from crawling over shattered glass. Then it hit me. My extra-large hot coffee from Tim Hortons? Not a single drop spilled on me. You should have seen the cop's face when I told him I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I'll never understand how I got so lucky. That accident gave me a deep appreciation for life. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. Story 36. A chronological list of all the times I've almost died. Before birth. My mom had a shotgun held to her stomach during a robbery while she was pregnant with me. No real thoughts on that one. I doubt the guy would have followed through. Age 6. Almost drowned in a pool, but was saved by a vigilant bystander. Didn't think much of it. Age 7. Nearly choked to death on Garfield brand ravioli. My grandmother punched me in the back, and it launched out of my throat. I ate it afterward. No regrets. Age 9. Had a prolonged fever of 104.7. Developed severe balance issues for months afterward. Was just happy to be out of school. Age 16. Sleep deprived and driving 90 miles per hour. I somehow dodged a herd of about 10 deer. Didn't even have time to process it. Just kept driving. Age 19. Threatened by a group of men who made some horrific threats toward me in the woods during a drunken chance meeting. We had just enough people to keep things from escalating. Still bothers me that I never got to make them pay for it. Age 22. Hit an ice patch going 70 miles per hour under a bridge. Did 2 full spins and slammed into a taxi. Ended up backward in the middle of a 3-lane highway. The salt truck drove by just moments later. My only thought, this is a sick soundtrack to Crash 2. Age 26. Driving 55 miles per hour in thick fog, I smashed straight into a cow's head. There were 3 cows loose on a 2-lane highway. My only thought as I hit it was, what the hell? That cow had to be the most confused animal alive afterward. Age 27. A strange man tried to lure me into the woods near my house. Apparently, he had attempted the same thing with multiple people that week. I had a dog with me. He didn't stand a chance. He was caught pretty quickly. Age 28. Driving 75 miles per hour on the interstate, I crested a hill and reflexively swerved when I saw headlights coming straight at me. It was a drunk driver going the wrong way. I didn't even check if I was cutting someone off. I just reacted. Pretty sure that move saved my life. Story 37. I had a near-death experience where my consciousness was completely removed from my physical body. I became hyper-aware of everything, including the fact that I had just been killed. Right before impact, my last thought was, as I realized while careening straight into the triaxle and trailer of a semi, that the driver hadn't been radioing his location on the private, radio-controlled ice road we were operating on. It was a narrow, winding snow and ice road that required strict radio communication for obvious safety reasons. He was either not calling his position or on the wrong frequency entirely. Either way, I had no way of knowing he was coming. I came around a blind corner that he was using every inch of, and I was annihilated. Then reality turned into vibration. I felt myself being sucked out of my body and into the void. I knew I was dead, but strangely, I wasn't afraid. I was comfortable, completely at peace. I went through a rapid, self-reflective analysis of my life leading up to that moment. When I reached the present, I felt overwhelming regret over how my relationship with my wife had deteriorated. I had spent so much time working away from home to provide for my family, but I should have been with them. And now I was just gone, alone in a frozen wasteland, my life ending in a busted-up pickup truck. I didn't even get to say goodbye. My heart shattered knowing how hard this would be for my family and friends. As I processed these thoughts, a large oval of light appeared in front of me. When I focused on it, I saw something familiar. The inside of my truck, from the perspective of my slumped-over body. I could see my cell phone lying on the floor. The moment I noticed it, I had a single thought. If I could just get to my phone, I could call my wife, tell her I love her, and say goodbye. And the second I thought that, I was yanked forward into the light and back into my body. Regaining control, my first instinct was to grab my phone. But then I realized, if I called anyone, all they would hear was me bleeding out. And no matter my intention, that would be traumatizing. Instead, I gritted my teeth, reached into the mess of my crushed leg, and started pulling on the mangled jeans and flesh until my limb came free from the pedals it had been trapped under. I had just completed a safety course that described how most people can't apply enough pressure to stop severe bleeding because of the excruciating pain. But I thought, screw that. I made it this far. I'm squeezing. So I did. I screamed through the pain until help arrived. The first aid attendant panicked at the sight of my injuries, proving herself completely unqualified. A security guard had to step in just to wrap my leg. Despite my repeated requests to have it splinted, they ignored me. So, for the next 300 kilometers before I reached a real ambulance, I bounced around in the back of a pickup, freezing, bones grinding, fighting off shock. The damage? Broken tibia, severed Achilles, multiple lacerations, punctures, and crushing injuries. Fractured hip, compressed spine, sprained wrist, and a whole list of other injuries that, compared to the rest, don't even seem worth mentioning. After multiple surgeries and a long hospital stay, I survived. But survival isn't always a victory. I've spent 6 years in pain. I've lost everything that mattered to me. There's no happy ending. My only comfort is knowing that one day I'll die again, and next time I'll embrace it. I've been an atheist my entire life. My belief used to be simple. Death is the end. Just nothingness, like before you were born. But after this experience, I'm convinced there's something more. I don't believe in a God, but I know consciousness is more than just what we experience in this reality. So yeah, now I'm that guy. Not religious, but spiritual. Story 38. I ragdolled 150 meters down a mountainside with torn ACLs. At first, my thought process was, I'll stop any minute. My knees are already wrecked, so I'll just let it happen naturally. I don't want to make it worse. Then as I kept tumbling, my brain switched. I think I'm actually going to die. This cannot happen. I don't care if I hurt myself more. I need to stop this fall now. Raw survival instinct took over. I stuck my arm out to slow myself down. Probably broke my shoulder in the process. Then out of nowhere, the ski guide, who had been skiing faster than he ever had in his life to catch me, slammed into me, stopping my fall completely. That may have been what broke my shoulder. I'll never know for sure. All I do know is that I'll be grateful to him for the rest of my life. And to the French paramedics who put me in a blood wagon, hauled me off the side of the mountain, and flew me out in a helicopter. It took almost a year before I stopped feeling that fear. That kind of trauma sticks with you. That door in your mind, the one that makes you relive the moment when you truly believed you were going to die, it takes a long time to close. Story 39. I was scuba diving, and due to some unfortunate coincidences, a slightly defective regulator valve and my own inexperience, I came dangerously close to suffocating. I think the term is hypoxia. As my CO2 levels rose, I remember my thoughts slowing down. So very slow. I vaguely considered whether I should warn the instructor that I was about to die. I thought about death, how inconvenient it would be, and whether it was even worth the trouble. Slowly, I reached for my tank, banged on it a couple of times to make noise, and signaled trouble and no air. My instructor reacted immediately, rushing to me and initiating an emergency ascent. What struck me the most was how odd it felt that someone was actually that concerned about my impending death. I could hear my own lungs rasping with each breath. It was surreal, but honestly, I felt incredibly calm. I don't think I've ever felt that calm in my life. Yeah, I thought dying in the ocean isn't that bad. And just as the instructor pushed their own regulator into my mouth to share air during our ascent, my last dying thought was how fascinating and educational experiencing death might be. Everything after that moment, the instant I got oxygen again, is a blur. I can't remember any of it, but those 3 to 4 minutes, they remain crystal clear. Story 40. When I was 14, my friends and I were messing around in a large forest one evening. Out of nowhere, two older men, probably in their 40s or 50s, appeared and suddenly became aggressive, chasing us. As I ran, I leaped off a small cliff, but I landed badly and broke my right leg. Unable to run, I was helpless as one of the men caught up to me, lifted me, and carried me deeper into the woods. He laid me down, took my phone and the cash from my wallet, and told me to stay put because he was going to help me. I begged him to call an ambulance, but he refused, insisting he would handle it. A horrible feeling settled in my gut. When he walked away, telling me to stay put until he returned, I knew I had to get out of there. I couldn't run. The pain in my leg was unbearable. So I crawled. It took me 30 minutes to drag myself through the dirt before I found some thick bushes that offered decent cover. I lay there hiding for what felt like an eternity, probably around an hour and a half, maybe 2. I genuinely thought I was going to die out there. Then in the distance, I heard my friends calling my name. I screamed as loud as I could, with every ounce of strength I had left. They had realized I was missing and had come back to search for me. The relief was indescribable. They immediately called the police and an ambulance. When the police arrived, they caught the man who had left me in the woods. He was carrying a 5-liter container of gasoline and was on his way back to where he had left me. I only learned this later. Before he was caught, he had even used my phone to call my mom, telling her I was missing before abruptly hanging up. He had found her contact listed under Mom in my phone book. Story 41. I'm a glider pilot, and during a flight, I attempted some stall maneuvers at an altitude that was way too low. I lost control and entered a spin. A spin happens when you lose all your speed and drop a wing, causing the plane to spiral downwards uncontrollably. Normally, it's not hard to prevent. I should have caught it before it happened, but I was distracted, and by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. At that moment, all that mattered was getting out of the spin. The problem is, once you're in one, it's difficult to recover because air needs to flow evenly over the aileron and elevator for them to function. Only the rudder, the tail control that directs the plane, still works. I knew this, but I had never dealt with it before. I froze. I stared at the ground as I spiraled downward at over 250 kilometers per hour, losing altitude by the second. The only thought in my head was, it doesn't even matter anymore. That thought still haunts me. I didn't even want to try to save myself. My life didn't flash before my eyes. I just felt empty. Somehow, instinct took over, and my body did what it was supposed to. I applied opposite rudder. The plane leveled out just in time. I regained control, executed my landing maneuver, and touched down safely. I had lost over 200 meters of altitude while spinning. When I stepped out of the cockpit, I was shaking uncontrollably.